Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grim Flayer. Hope you're doing very well today, and it is time for some Mardu mid-range in Modern. We have never played this color trio before. We, of course, play mid-range decks all the time, so we are at once in familiar and unfamiliar territory. This is a donation league for a very wonderful donor, Connor Smith. This one is for you, my friend. Thank you for all your generous support. This will also be a replay. Why is this a replay? Well, to be frank, it is kind of my penance to make this a replay. I do confess that I was live recording, and I started tilting while recording, and I looked back, and I didn't really like what I heard. Now, in my defense, here's just a little glimpse into my life, my friends, okay? In the month of December, I talked about this a little bit on Discord. In the month of December, every one of my work weeks was 50-plus hours, and they were generally pretty hard hours. In the year of 2020 as a whole, zooming out, I really don't think my wife and I got a single night away from the kids, and as much as we love all of that, you know, I love getting a lot of hours of work. I know a lot of people are, you know, underemployed or out of employment right now. I'm not ungrateful for any of this, but it does really sometimes put the pressure on me. I am only human, and when I can only carve out time for like one league a week, and I have all those other pressures, plus all the hours I do put into the channel, and I spend a lot of time brewing and tweaking, and then things just fall apart as soon as I play the league. Well, you know, I try to remain sanguine generally, but every now and then it does afflict me in a way that I don't think is productive. So we are going to zoom out. We are going to look at this as a replay with the benefit of distance, and therefore I can give you maybe a more positive vibe here. We're going to have more fun than we otherwise would, and we can get some more useful analysis, and that will be my agenda here. That is my agenda with making this into a replay. So this once again is for Connor. Big shout out to you, my friend. Big shout out to everybody who talked the list through in the Discord, and big shout out to our newest and newly upgraded Patreon supporters. There are 3 of them I need to shout out real quick before we get into the deck tech. We've got a new Inquisitor, Corey Wooten, big fan of that. Thank you so much, Corey. We've got a brand new tireless tier member, Matt Swanson. Love to see that. Thank you for the generous support, my friend. Speaking of generous support and wonderful supporters, we've got James Clugston, a very pleasant fellow. Always enjoy talking to him, a big Jund player. He's upgraded from Confidant to join the tier list here as well, so a big shout out to each of you, and especially to Connor. Now, let's talk a little bit about this rather unorthodox Mardu mid-range list before we look at some gameplay. Okay, so I'm going to begin by looking at the proven core. We have 3 Fatal Push, I should say 3 each of Fatal Push, Inquisition, Thoughtseize, and Lightning Bolt. A little hard to argue with any of that. Obviously, you can tweak the numbers in a couple different directions, but generally speaking, those interactive effects backed up by a 1 of Cling to Dust is giving us the solid Rakdos core of interaction that's very, very powerful in Modern right now. 2 copies of Dreadbore. I think Terminate's a good guard too, but I think in a list like this, we would rather have a Dreadbore in that slot as a 2 of. And in so far as the red threats go, Seasoned Pyromancer, the glue of so many archetypes right now, this one is no exception. Bonecrusher Giant, another very powerful, virtually guaranteed X for 1 card in the colors. So if you look at that, and then you look at the 4 copies of Stoneforge Mystic. Let's not talk about what she's fetching right now, just the idea of 4 copies of SFM plus some really powerful equipment. That, I think, is what you would have no matter what in the Mardu archetype. Now, from there, the way I see it, and Mardu is not very much in the meta, although it is starting to make a few more noises right now. One way you could do it is try to flesh it out by imitating the Young Pyromancer builds of old. You could play maxed out Lingering Souls, maxed out Young Pyromancers, fill the rest with instants and sorceries. And you don't have Faithless Looting, but you do have Stoneforge Mystic, so a lot of people have been trying that. That's the problem. It hasn't really succeeded at all. That archetype seems to have been fatally destroyed by the Faithless Looting ban, and probably needs another printing to breathe new life into it of some kind, whether it be another reward for going wide that's really powerful, or another looting light effect. So we're not doing that, and nor do I think we should be. Another way you could build Mardu, in a way that I was really kind of advocating for during our discussion before it became more clear what our donor exactly wanted to see, would be kind of a Mardu Moon build, where all the core cards I just mentioned, plus 3 to 4 main deck Blood Moons, and a really high card quality around that, whether you flesh out the list with Kroxa or a Magmatic Channeler or whatever else you might do in a Rakdos list. It is basically a Rakdos list with white for Stoneforge Mystic and also white for sideboard cards, whatever ones are A, the most effective, and B, the most castable under Moon, with perhaps a little scope for like Auriok Champion in Blood Moons out against red decks, for example. But mostly a Mardu Moon deck, mostly a Rakdos deck, splashing white for Stoneforge Mystic and for sideboard cards. Honestly, having gone into the discussion, I thought that was the most powerful way to try to brew and build Mardu. Having played this league that I'm about to show you, I still think it is. But as the discussion went on, and it was a very fun and productive discussion, it did become clear that our donor Connor was really excited to see Embercleave, and to a lesser extent Shadow Spear, and a couple copies of Lingering Souls, and also Rankle, Master of Pranks, and basically a go-wide strategy as a way to flesh out that interactive core. Now, there's a lot to like about this. Embercleave is a really cool card, but I personally think it belongs more in like a zoo deck, where you're always going wide quickly. And a lot of your creatures are very efficient in terms of the rates, so the double strike really adds up too, because they have naturally high power levels relative to the mana you've paid for them. We also have Rankle, Master of Pranks, who I think is a really powerful card. Some of the guys in my Discord have had really nice success playing Rankle in straight Rakdos lately. But here, you know, Stoneforge wants us to go a little bit slower, and wants us to keep a little bit more of a full hand. Lingering Souls also wants us to go slow, and the splash of white, making the third color, makes us a little bit worse at racing just because our land base is that much more painful. So to me, I cannot get over the hump of Embercleave and, again, to a lesser extent, Shadow Spear, feeling at odds with the whole nature of the deck as a whole. I personally found myself in testing, and maybe in the league that we'll see, wishing for a Sword of Fire and Ice, thinking maybe a second Batterskull could be interesting in some spots, things like that. That said, there are a lot of synergies here. Embercleave grants double strike, you can double proc Rankle, that's pretty cool. It's potentially very powerful, but you do have to admit it is a little win more. You know, if you're already connecting with Rankle, things are probably going pretty well for you. And it might also be a little bit hard to set up. Lingering Souls also. It's nice to have these expendable bodies, just like the ones that can be made by Spyro, to sack to Rankle. That's a great synergy. It's also nice to go wide to help us, you know, cast an Embercleave. On the whole, though, again, is the card quality as high as it could be? I'm not sure. Are the messages in this list a little bit too mixed? I think so. But we're definitely at least got a coherent build going on. There is a lot to like. So we've kind of covered everything in the main deck. Let's just round it out by looking at a one of main deck Collective Brutality. As you can see, our curve is very high. Our potential for clunk is huge. Brutality helps us smooth that out, helps us get a little tempo early, good synergy with Souls. Kaya, and also helps shore up some of the weaknesses of our deck. Kaya Orzhov Usurper. This was initially a Kaya's Guile, but we ended up going for the Usurper. I think she's just really well positioned right now. There is a lot to like about what she brings to the table. And one other kind of glaring weakness to me about this deck is without her, there are no Planeswalkers. And a mid-range deck without Planeswalkers will just lack that kind of special ability to grind people out in the way that only the Planeswalker card type can. And Planeswalkers, if things are equal, you can almost always find a way to X for one the opponent into a favorable position. Again, if you're totally leaving that card off the table, that card category off the table, which with the go wide plan we kind of have to, you are just again leaving some percentage points out, in my opinion. But we do have a one of Kaya who can hopefully do some good work for us. Take a quick look at the land base. We went up to 23 lands. I think with a 3-color deck and with such a high curve, that is obligatory. The land base is a little eclectic, but it does work out to have some really good color production and some utility as well. Savai Triome functions as the 10th land alongside 9 fetch lands that can make all 3 colors. Little utility from the Triome as well. We've got a Sunbaked Canyon to prevent flooding issues. We've got a Castle Embereth to reward us from going wide, which I think is a really spicy inclusion. And we've got, just a little bit, as I say, of an eclectic mix over here. 1 Blackcleave Cliffs, 1 Concealed Courtyard, 1 Fetid Heath. These are... The mana base looks a little bit incoherent, but if you look at our color demands, I actually think this is pretty reasonable. Below that, we have 4 shock lands, 4 basic lands. That is pretty standard stuff in a 3-color deck. Onto the sideboard, we do have a very heavy white presence, hopefully rewarding us for that white splash. 1 each of Celestial Purge and Revoke Existence. It is very nice to exile the likes of Klothys, Heliod, similar things right now. Even Wormcoil Engine is always a concern with stuff like Revoke Existence. And generally speaking, we do want to have access to these Disenchant Plus style effects. Now, the one thing I will say very consistently is I felt myself missing in a Braid or a Kolaghan's Command or something like that that can be that extra shatter effect and that kill spell. And I should say before I miss it, we also have a Wear and Tear. So we're not light on these Disenchant Plus effects, but none of them are necessarily free rolls against like Ether Vial decks, for example, because you can hit the Vial, but what if you need a creature kill spell, right? That's where a Braid and K command are amazing. So one thing to mention before we move on, but those cards are still all really good incentives to play white. Honestly, they're all really nice right now. 2 copies of Path to Exile, 2 copies of Rest in Peace, 2 copies of Auriok Champion. Now we get into the kind of higher card quality, more staples. Auriok Champion, we do like a lot, I think, in this list for the fact that she's so well positioned in the meta, and she rewards us for going wide in a couple different ways. She can pick up a weapon with our 4 pieces of equipment. Very, very nice. One thing I did encounter is a lot of people assuming we were heavier into graveyard effects than we actually are. That means, number 1, they might be bringing in effects like this against us that aren't even that good, and number 2, it does allow us to pretty freely jam some RIPs of our own. Path to Exile, just extra removal with an Exile clause, can't beat it. 1 copy of EE to take advantage of our 3-color mana base. Cleansing Wildfire ×3 is an acknowledgement that we're not playing Blood Moon and our big mana matchups are pretty horrible. The white splash seeming to actively hurt us here in those matchups compared to what a Rakdos deck would look like. So we got to play some kind of way to break up Tron and so forth. Wildfire will do. 2 copies of Boil because we do hate the piles and we do probably need a leg up against them as well. I did mention the 1 of Wear and Tear. So that is the kind of esoteric Mardu midrange list that we are going with. Thank you so much for watching, my friends. Thank you yet again to Connor, and let us dive right into round 1. Okay, I'm showing you the matches a little out of order, and guess what? This is the coolest match, I think, of the league. So if you only watch one, let it be this one. We've got a really balanced opening hand. The big problem, though, is we have an Embercleave in our hand, which, as you can see, it's just like... it just doesn't feel like an Embercleave deck to me, right? And we also kind of just hate to draw equipment most of the time on average. So I'm thinking, nevertheless, it's a really nice keep. We can go Inquisition into Stomp, into Bonecrusher, into Rankle if we draw a 4th land in the top 4 cards. However, we draw another Shadow Spear, already kind of not loving, not feeling as confident, because these just have every chance of being dead cards for a long time anyway against a Flooded Strand deck. But hopefully the core of, the interaction, such as Inquisition, can really help us out here. We appear to be against blue-white miracles based on all these basic lands plus the Field of Ruin, not expecting a 3rd color splash. And we see Snapcaster Mage, Logic Knot, Force of Negation. These are the types of cards that also speak to the absence of Uro. So identifying the need to play for the long game, we do take Snapcaster Mage. As much as we will probably need to brute force our way through this permission at some point, we do have some relatively expendable cards we can test their mettle with. And we begin by just running the Shadow Spear out, baiting the Logic Knot as hard as possible. It's like, look, you only need to delve for one, don't you want to counter it? But opponent says nope, and then we get to kind of time walk them. So it's a little bit of a win-win. Again, whether Shadow Spear will do anything, that might remain to be seen. But opponent just making land drops, holding up their permission, saying go. And we are unfortunately only drawing lands as well. So here we go, just kind of trying to go back and forth, a little bit of draw-go action. But as soon as opponent taps out for the Field of Ruin, we are going to take that chance to stomp them. Why? Well, Force of Negation, countering a non-creature spell in the form of Stomp, exiling our Giant, not where we want to be. So then our Giant's just in exile. OP shows us a land we did not know about, and we will fetch back over to us, and we're looking for a way to, again, maybe test the waters on our own terms. Maybe we open with a discard spell. If we had one, that'd be great. We don't, so we make a land drop to make their Logic Knot a little bit worse, and then we play the Bonecrusher, who they will let resolve, because they have drawn a removal spell. So they're going to path it. Honestly, that's okay for us too. Obviously, Bonecrusher doing a lot of work, taxing them for 4 life overall. And unfortunately, we do have a little bit of a jumbled up hand now. We draw Dreadbore. It's just another reactive card. It's just another card that we can't brute force our way through the permission with. We've still got the equipment not really doing much. So we begin by cracking a Canyon, and we find another Seasoned Pyromancer. So now we have enough payoffs in hand that will probably win the game if they resolve, that we just have to start casting them. Opponent's drawn a third piece of permission, though, so we let on Rankle because Rankle's got the highest upside and the least downside if they, for some reason, let him resolve. But we kind of knew they wouldn't let any of the things in our hand resolve, and Monoleague is what takes care of Rankle. We draw another one. So, following the same exact incentives as last time, here we go. Running out Rankle into known permission. Looks like it's going to be Logic Knot this time. Opponent will delve away 3 cards, and we will just have to say go. But we still have a couple Spyros in hand, and opponent has played that Plains. Their hand is Force of Negation and 2 unknowns. We do have a little bit of a dearth of red, but that's no reason not to go for it here. We don't know that they have permission. We're pretty lucky to have faded like a Cryptic Command, and Seasoned Pyro will resolve. So we're pitching Dreadbore and Embercleave, our most conditional and reactive cards. We get to go wide, and we also get to draw into Kaya and Stoneforge Mystic up. A couple of good ones. And because they didn't counter Spyro, we also know they're not going to counter the SFM. We go get Sword of Feast and Famine. This is actually a really interesting decision, because if you look at our hand, one of the things that we might do next turn is just try to resolve another Spyro before they have a chance to draw more permission. If we do, we might have to pitch the sword. If we were going to pitch the sword, maybe, or pitch whatever equipment we drew, maybe we could have gotten, I don't know, Batterskull. Is that even correct? I have no idea. So there's a lot going on here. Or maybe we would be more incentivized to play through SFM if we had gotten Batterskull. As it turns out, OP's just going to hardcast a Terminus, wiping our board. That's a little bit rude, but it does clear the way for us to resolve a creature. At least we know that for sure. We draw Concealed Courtyard. Concealed Courtyard does not enter the battlefield untapped at this stage, so we're going to once again lead on the Spyro, pitch that, and then pitch either the equipment or the Bonecrusher Giant. You could make an argument for either. I do end up pitching the sword, and we draw into 2 lands, which is not very good. However, at least one is fine because it lets us cast Kaya. I think opponent tanked a little bit over whether or not to let her resolve with a force. They decide to let her, so she starts eating away at the graveyard, which is pretty important here. And perhaps more importantly, she doesn't take very long to ult. And we draw Thoughtseize, which is quite nice. You know, at most any stage of the game against a deck like this, under these types of circumstances, drawing a discard spell is what we want to do. We don't want to overload on them, especially if they're already close to Hellbent, but in these types of games, it's just what we need. We're going to take up with Kaya first, because I'm not that scared of anything in their graveyard, and I just want to make sure she gets to activate before anything else happens. We'll then follow up with a Thoughtseize. OP will opt. and then OP will hardcast Force of Negation. So then we go to attacks, and we could have equipped Shadow Spear here. I do decide that we don't think they have any more permissions, so stomping with Bonecrusher Giant and then hardcasting it is fine. I thought about not hardcasting it, actually, because one of their other better routes is a Terminus, but they not only have to Terminus, they also have to deal with Kaya. She's ready to ult, and they have 7 cards in exile, and our stomp put them to 6. So they have to deal with the board, and they have to deal with Kaya, therefore I feel pretty comfortable playing out the Bonecrusher Giant. Opponent will cast an Archmage's Charm to draw 2, then they're going to scoop it up, realizing they're dead to Kaya. There was a bit of tanking from the OP over A, whether to let Kaya resolve, and B, as I recall, kind of on this turn here. I think they might have underestimated Kaya a little bit, and I think that's going to happen a lot. It's pretty easy to take a glance at her and say, okay, you know, the +1 isn't great for me, the -1 doesn't do anything. Sure, I guess we let her resolve, but her ultimate comes really quickly, and in the context of a deck like this that does incidentally pressure the life total even when you're playing a more back and forth game, she can be the finisher, and that's exactly what happened here. Pretty easy sideboarding here, my friends. I took out my Fatal Pushes and my Shadow Spear, and I brought in 2 Boils and 2 Rest in Pieces. Seems really good to me. And our opening hand is once again the exact same as in Game 1 in that it's functional, it's got a nice curve. I don't know if I like the equipment in hand, specifically one that needs us to go wide with in the form of Embercleave. But that's where we're at with the opener. It is worth a keep. And we Thoughtseize the opponent T1. We see a whiteless hand, but one that they can, you know, fix easily enough with Field of Ruin in terms of the mana production. We see Shark Typhoon and Frantic Inventory, which right now both kind of do the same thing. They're both going to draw a card on turn 2. They both have higher upsides as the game goes longer. There's also Timely Reinforcements, which we need to really carefully see how much we can play around. It's a really good card against us, and a good old Force of Negation. We take the Typhoon, because if they draw other things to do, we would rather have them just with a cantrip in hand that, you know, if they draw other Frantic Inventories, it's going to be good in the graveyard whether or not they cast it, whereas Shark Typhoon in hand has a much higher ceiling, right? So that's the take. You can also take Timely if you don't think you can play around it, but with our hand, I actually kind of think we can. Note that Castle Embereth cannot enter untapped here. Don't let this trap you. It is not a mountain. We've drawn Kaya or Zov Usurper. A very nice draw. So I'm going to Fetch, Shock main phase, and Stomp main phase. Of course, normally you'd want to do your instant speed shocks to the face on the end step, but once again, we are playing around that Force of Negation. As much as we might want to bait the Force on a Giant at some point, we don't need to do that with the first one. We do still want to secure an X for 1 if we can. OP on the end step's going to cantrip with Frantic Inventory, untap, play the Field of Ruin, say go. We draw Savai Triome, and at this point I am just going to play it. We're going to try to find a spot to resolve Kaya. Just like in round 1, we could now stomp with them tapped out, but this time I'm not going to. I don't even float mana, I'm not signaling anything. I want them to maybe be a little bit worried here and then take the trade with Force of Negation on our stomp here on the end step. That's the plan, and will they go for it? They will not. So some discipline from the opponent, and now we're at a spot where it's like, okay, do we start just like trying to resolve Bonecrusher Giants and, you know, then the opponent gets to play a Timely Reinforcements. Thankfully, we just draw Inquisition of Kozilek, just like we drew it up. So we play a land to play around Mono League, which we saw in Game 1. We lead on the Inquisition, and opponent will go ahead and Force of Negation it. And obviously, that's good for us. It means we get to resolve Kaya again. We get to eat some of the most pertinent threats out of the graveyard, and we get to once again kind of threaten the ultimate. Opponent plays a Mystic Sanctuary with nothing to buy back. Is that not a wonderful thing? So, we draw another Thoughtseize. Again, very, very nice draws here. And I thought about activating Kaya first like we did in the first round, but there's nothing of import to eat. And we do expect some kind of action here, permission, or maybe in this case an opt that we would rather eat with Kaya. So we do begin with a Thoughtseize. We are punished because the opponent gets to keep just any cards in their graveyard. That Typhoon in the field could fuel a Delve spell, but the Thoughtseize at the end of the day will resolve. We see Terminus, and we see that timely reinforcements we knew about, and another Mystic Sanctuary, so we take the Terminus, because right now, we're behind on life, and we're just about to play our first creature, so the timely, not even that good. Not even that good. Opponent will top the opt out of their graveyard with that Mystic Sanctuary, and then will they just make 3 tokens? Indeed, they will. One of the reasons, among others, that I've mentioned here that we're comfortable doing that is because we have a Dreadbore just kind of rotting in hand. On the chance that they are playing some Planeswalkers, I judged it better to leave it in over a more efficient push to kill like Snapcasters and tokens. Better to have something that can beat it, Jace, right? But we haven't seen the Planeswalkers yet, so I'm just going to Dreadbore a Soldier, which is going to allow us to attack with the Bonecrusher Giant and see what the opponent's got. They've got another Celestial Purge, fair enough. The Bonecrusher is still doing a ton of work for us, and now we go ahead and play that other one. Embercleave still just kind of chilling in hand, but you know what? That's okay. Maybe we'll find some good uses for it. Opponent will opt into Sanctuary, buying back timely, and once again, it's not the worst for us, and we know they're going to draw it, and they are also totally hellbent. So there's a lot going on in our favor, but we need to sequence pretty carefully here. So if we attack, we actually make their timely reinforcements good if we attack with Bonecrusher Giant, because then the opponent will be behind us on life, and they'll still just chump block with a Soldier to keep their life total relatively high. But they'll also get to make 3 tokens again. We don't want that. So to that end, we attack only with Rankle. We don't do anything. He's just a 3/3 haste flyer, basically, at the moment. So now the opponent's going to draw that reinforcements, and it's like, okay, do they cast it just to gain 6 life? Or do they do nothing and try to find a better spot for it? They do nothing, try to find a better spot for it. The only problem with that is that Rankle is on the field, and we can just very easily +1. Now, the opponent knows that we've been playing reactively with a card in hand, so you understand why they might think, well, okay, we'll at least get whatever that is out of their hand. But nope, now it is Embercleave's time to shine. You love to see that. So we've got the reduced casting cost. We get to attach it for free, and now we get to get the timely out of their hand. And if the opponent didn't block here, we would have killed them because of double strike. But now we just get to at least discard them out once. And then from here, it was actually a little bit interesting to even consider doing each player loses 1 life and draws a card twice, because that would put them all the way down to 1. It shuts off fetch lands. I just thought the risk was way too high. They could draw like another timely reinforcements, for example, to stabilize and make those risky draws to ping the opponent very, very unlikely to be beneficial for us. I think on average their deck does out-top deck ours, so I said, okay, let's just put them to 3, let's just see if they can beat this. As it turns out, opponent drew a fetch land, so they were dead no matter what we did with Rankle, but it is worth noting that we had a few options there, and Rankle's ability for each player to lose 1 life and draw a card is underrated as a finisher in conjunction with all of the, as I said in Game 1, incidental pressure we put on the opponent's life total. So that was our cool Embercleave moment. We did secure an Embercleave connection. We got to double strike with Rankle. That was really cool. It turns out that Rankle's on-hit procs didn't have much impact on the game overall, but that's because the opponent wasn't really playing the board, and we already had them hellbent through other means. So a nice comprehensive win here in round 1 over Blue-White Miracles. No Boil needed. And the core of the deck, as identified in the deck tech, really pulling the weight. The discard spells were huge. In round 1, Spyro to Brute Force after Rankle traded off with Permission a lot was really, really key there too. So note the as cool as the finish here was with Embercleave assisting, note how the equipment in general proving to be a little bit clunky. When we're on Spyro, when we're on Rankle, we're often having to have those cards kind of sit in hand, not doing much in the opening stages of the game, and then also getting turned into a token or being part of a symmetrical discard exchange in the late game. It's just one of those incongruities I think is there with this particular deck, but sometimes things do come together, and this was one of those times. It's round 2, and we've got a high curve hand, my friends, but I think in the blind it is a keep. We can go Bolt into Stomp or Bolt into Stoneforge as the case dictates. Hopefully draw a third land from there. We are on the draw, so it is quite likely. Then from there we can take a couple different directions. Opponent will mull to 6, play a Fiery Islet, and say go. We draw Fatal Push, and part of me was like, okay, is this a mono-red prowess hand without a turn 1 play? But I said, if it is, we don't necessarily need to shock. They obviously didn't have a haste threat here turn 1. Maybe they'd play like a Kiln Fiend or something turn 2. We wouldn't necessarily need to push it on sight. Let's save the life total in case it's prowess or burn. And if it's not, well, maybe we won't have targets for our removal anyway. So we just kind of do nothing here. As it turns out, we're not against either of those. The opponent will cycle a Windcaller Aven, so this is the Electro Dominance as foretold deck. And we draw another clunker. We got Clunk City in the hand here, but we're going to shock in. We're going to resolve an SFM, and having drawn the Sword of Feast and Famine, obviously that's not great, so we go get Batterskull, basically just reasoning, hey, if we cannot necessarily curve out in the way we'd like to, and our interaction is not really that relevant, at least for now, let's just see if they can beat a Batterskull. We'll just cheat on mana as much as possible, be as efficient as possible. OP cycling up a Storm over there at some cost to their own life total. No as foretold this turn, nothing else. And we draw a Fatal Push, so not very good. I thought about my first instinct here was to activate in the main phase, so I would not have to discard to hand size. And then I said, well, wait a minute, we're against a Living End deck. Maybe discarding to hand size is exactly what we want to do. So we pitch Spyro. I think that's honestly pretty cool. We'll see how it goes for us, of course, but opponent will make a 4th land drop. Then they did find that as foretold, and we knew they had some kind of a free spell ready to go. It is Crashing Footfall, so a couple of Rhinos coming down. But hey, you know, we thought our interaction was bad. You thought your Fatal Pushes were going to be dead against the Living End deck. Think again. Push can take care of Rhino. What a time to be alive. So, Flash and Batterskull, all part of the plan. And then we untap and we draw an Embercleave. So, sometimes, even when some things are going our way with this deck, it feels like something will always not be going our way, right? That's just kind of the sense I get. Maybe that's just a consequence of playing the equipment in general, but certainly the heavy top end as a whole does not necessarily help. But it was pretty cool. We got to push both Rhinos. We got to swing in with our Squire and our Germ, and the opponent's over there scrambling for something. Fiery Islet is cracked. They find another couple Rhinos off of another Crashing Footfalls. So now, unfortunately, we don't have 2 more Fatal Pushes in hand. We got to slow down a bit. I do offer the trade here. I think that's fine. Either way, basically, you can sit back, you can trade. There's not a huge amount of difference. Might as well force a little bit of action because we are the aggressor. I then decide that a main phase fetch is warranted just because it looks like we're riding Batterskull to victory as much as we can until we draw more relevant interaction anyway. And therefore, we're going to want to bounce it, and we don't want the opponent to have some way to deal with it while our fetch land is on the stack, if that's our plan. So anyway, opponent will do the Mystic Sanctuary thing. Every deck's playing Mystic Sanctuary that's blue, basically. I can't wait to see, like, Merfolk play it next, right? It's just one of those ubiquitous cards, and there's the Rhinos they bought back off of it, so we're having to win through 6 Rhino tokens here, all of which were freely cast. On the end step, after taking 4, we'll go ahead and bounce that Batterskull, really looking to draw another land, but we don't. So we continue to be really clunked up. We continue to just kind of put our hope here into Batterskull as much as we can. But thankfully, we are fading some real crazy payoffs from the opponent, like Ancestral Vision or Living End. Opponent just sending in a single Rhino. At this point, again, you could take the block, you could not, whatever. I think just like taking the front foot, again, making the attack, enforcing the trade rather than the block, getting the life. Again, kind of ends the same way, but should we draw kill spells, I suppose, doing it this way is a little bit more rewarding. In any case, we are looking to close out the game with a lightning bolt upstairs to help speed us along. Then we do draw that 4th land, and we could do a couple different things here. We could attack, we could see what they got. We could also, if we're worried about permission, which I kind of was, flash in Sword of Feast and Famine, then equip the Germ. But here was my reasoning, and it might be totally wrong. I've seen these decks play main deck bounce effects, and I'm thinking, okay, if we go all in on this Germ, it can attack through the rhinos, and it can just win. But if they have some way to bounce it, I think we're going to be in big trouble, because we could potentially get tempoed out. We already spent a couple turns not really doing anything besides bouncing and replaying the Batterskull. And if we are just kind of operating as normal, we are going to win this race anyway. We have ways to close it out. So I chose not to go all in for the kill here. Maybe a mistake. The other thing here is that Rankle can very easily help end the game too, again, without shoving all in on something that can get blown out by a bounce effect. Maybe I was playing too cautiously here. I definitely played straight into their hands with Remand. So feeling a little bit worried about that, like I made the wrong play. And then we do just send in the Batterskull. The opponent will take the trade. That said, there's still a lot to like here, but that was definitely a little bit rough, and now the option to suit up the Germ is off the table for a couple turns. We draw Collective Brutality. My first thought was, cool, let's play it and clear the way. But another bit of a tough call, because if we're going to play the Brutality, we want to escalate, because our hand is so clunky, and because draining them for 2 matters a lot. But escalating a Brutality is just as bad as a Remand against a Remand in a different way, is running the Rankle again out into it is. So we just play a Rankle again. They know about it, and Rankle's honestly really good if they cannot stop him from hitting the field, and they cannot. So Rankle gets to do a lot here. Each player is going to discard a card. We've got plenty of clunk to pitch, and each player will sack a creature, enabling us to trade a Squire for a Rhino token. And hey, we came here to test Rankle, right? We came here to play some Rankle in Modern. So opponent a bit flooded. They do pitch a land, and Rankle is going to put them within stomp range. Opponent swings back with the Rhino. The Batterskull has given us so much life here that we don't care. And then it's back to us. We draw Inquisition, which is cool, but let's just begin with an attack with Rankle. Opponent will hard cast an Electro-Dominance just to kill the Rankle. We're going to go for the Stomp. They've got Force of Negation. We've got another Stomp. That's the GG. So, once again, the notion of going all in on the Batterskull was probably the correct one, but again, I've seen bounce effects. I've seen the likes of Petty Theft main decked in decks like this and in other similar effects where if we were to get blown out that way, I think there's a decent chance we could have lost from there. Whereas if we pass up the chance to end the game, I still think we were ahead from there. The Living End is obviously something that we did want to fade, but, you know, we had the Spyro to come back for free. I don't think we had anything else in the graveyard by then, but I could be mistaken. But we also had all this reach in hand, so I was feeling able to win as long as I kept not getting blown out. I hope you understand that. I'm still open to the idea that if I knew the deck lists better, exactly what was being played in these decks right now on average, maybe I would have gone for the SFM line. But either way, Batterskull, of all things, steals game 1 against As Foretold Electro-Dominance combo. Certainly not something you see every day. We definitely got lucky to fade some of the real good payoffs. Okay, so a lot of sideboarding going on. I did move away from cards like Dreadbore, Lingering Souls. I cut a single Fatal Push, although leaving them in to beat Rhinos is actually okay to some degree, I think, in this build. And we also take out one SFM and the Embercleave and the Shadow Spear. I just don't think any of those are especially realistic win conditions, although there's a lot of nuance here, and the notion of Shadow Spear to beat the Hexproof threat gave me pause. There's one of the blue cyclers that does have hexproof, that if we're playing a game where you're trying to deal with them to some degree after they come down, Shadow Spear helps in that regard, but I don't think we can do too many things overall to beat that eventuality. So I did decide that we're going to play, instead of Shadow Spear, basically, because we don't have infinite slots, a couple Paths to Exile. You know, they take care of Rhino tokens too, even though it's inefficient. They take care of, I think, all the other payoffs besides the Hexproof one for a Living End. And to prevent the Living End, we've got Rest in Pieces that have got to come in. We've got Revoke Existence, Wear and Tear, and we also played a couple Boils. I was hesitant about that. I think I almost only played one, because it would suck to have the chance to boil them out, and they're just playing free spells through an Ask for Told anyway. But Ask for Told's a #1 discard target. We've got ways to answer it after it's hit the board. I think the free win potential of Boil is probably worth playing, but I'm open to debating that a bit. Unfortunately for us... Whoops, I gotta go back here. Okay, as I was saying before I hit the play button, unfortunately for us, we have a perfectly balanced mid-range hand, and although that type of hand did win game 1, I think post-side, I'm just about supposed to throw this back. You know, Lightning Bolt's not killing anything on curve. Stoneforge Mystic, yes, can you beat a Batterskull, worked for us game 1, but this is all just too fair, in my opinion, so I did send it back after some deliberation. This 6 is not much better. It's only a 2-lander. We've got double Spyro, Rankle. The curve is too high. We don't have the interaction we're looking for. I'd just love a discard spell if we can't get our hate pieces, right? But we don't have any of that, so I do decide to go to 5. Now we've got some hate pieces. We've got Cling to Dust and Rest in Peace. Normally I'd be happy to keep the 7 and try to cling early, whether it be getting rid of a creature in case our rip doesn't resolve, or just clinging to draw before our rip does resolve. But we do have some things to choose to bottom here, so I do end up bottoming the Cling, little non-Bowie with rip. We are all in on rip resolving and winning us the game, and one of the 2 Bonecrusher Giant. So we've got Path to Exile to beat an early threat that can maybe be living ended out before our rip comes down. We draw Thoughtseize for turn. Perfect. Clear the way for our rip. We're all in on this plan. Then we just need to get a 3rd land to get the Giant attacking and try to win before they can do anything about it. We'll Thoughtseize them after they've kept 7. We see a 3-lander with Living End, Curator of Mysteries, Crashing Footfalls, and Electro Dominance to cast the free spells. Pretty easy take of Footfalls there because we just want to make the Living End bad with this rip. So back to the opponent. They're going to play out a fetch land and say go. Back over to us. We draw Inquisition. You know, if they draw exactly permission on this one turn, so be it. I'm not going to tempo myself out. We're just going to slam the rip. Opponent will Living End in response after cycling the Curator of Mysteries off of this Electro Dominance. So that's out of hand, that's out of hand, that's out of hand. And now, on their main phase, they have 3 unknowns in hand, plus a Talaria West in their graveyards are totally hosed by our good old Rest in Peace. The opponent has a 4/4 flyer that does allow them to scry if they draw more cyclers. So, back over to us, we draw Boil, but we're still only on 2 lands. I decide to lead with Inquisition. It turns out that we're punished for that pretty severely, right? They do have 2 action cards in hand of a kind, but neither are hit by Inquisition. They're both cycling cards. And whereas if I had begun by pathing the Curator, they would probably have cycled in response to get some scry value, and maybe their hand would look different. Maybe I could take something with Inquisition. On the other hand, clearing the way with Inquisition for permission guarantees that we can deal with this. And we're at 11 life, and it's a 4/4. And a lot of our otherwise decent top decks will not deal with it, right? Especially on only 2 lands. So that is definitely a judgment call that I think you could justify either way. As it turns out, it did not go our way. Opponent cycling up a storm, scrying up a storm, and eventually getting pathed. But, you know, they've got to search their library anyway, so who knows? Who knows? But back over to us, we draw another relatively unexciting card in the form of Lightning Bolt. We'll stomp them on the end step after they play out that Talaria West. Back over to us, SFM, a little bit more draw-go action, but now we've got something we want to main phase. Opponent's found a Remand. that one hurts. That hurts a lot, because the opponent's clearly flooded. They're clearly locked out of some of their stuff by Rip, but the Remand is going to tempo us out, keep our board clear, and just dig them that one card deeper, right? We still need them to have a big fail rate, even though some things have gone our way. Other things, such as the Mull to 5 and the Inquisition whiffing, have not gone our way. And now the opponent has finally found the ability to hard cast a 7-drop. It is a 5/5 hexproof of the kind I was mentioning during sideboarding. We draw a third land, not really that exciting, especially because it's a shock land. You know, can't afford to shock in and go to 9 against the 5/5 hexproof. We need more time than that. We've got Batterskull, though, and now I'm thinking, okay, we might be able to survive long enough to get in a scenario where we can race with Batterskull or even double block with Batterskull and Stoneforge on the hexproof, but the opponent's found another threat to hardcast it as a 4/4 flyer. That one is a little bit rough. We would love to find an answer to it. Instead, we draw a 4th land, so we can boil them out now, and you can see how good the boil would be, but we just leave ourselves dead. As it turns out, you know, we are in a spot where we've got to maybe chump block with the Batterskull. We're going to see what happens, but the opponent's going to go straight to attacks. During attacks, they've got another Windcaller Aven to cycle, which is going to, with a triggered ability, grant the hexproof threat flying. So, the opponent very stylishly winning through our Rip. And again, we mulled to 5. We had an Inquisition whiff. We also were stuck on 2 lands for most of the time. We had a lot of things not going our way. We were still, I think, pretty close to turning this one around, but the opponent able to curve out, hardcast a threat that we couldn't deal with, and that was that. On the play here for Game 3, which is where we want to be, but it's another hand that is just too fair, in my opinion. We love the Thoughtseize. I was pretty close to keeping this. If we had had a Rest in Peace to follow it up, or, you know, even a Cling to Dust. Even a Cling to Dust would have had me in the idea of keeping it, but too much fair, grindy, red action, if you ask me. So, given our 60 post side looking pretty good, given our chance at a kind of free win in a few different ways, if it lines up, I do decide to throw it back, and once again, we're just given like a dead guy ill hand, basically. Rankle, Stoneforge Mystic, and 2 pieces of equipment. This is a disastrous hand. I'm feeling very punished for some mulligans, and now we go to 5, and we draw both boils, and also another 4-drop, so all the high curve stuff. It's just pretty frustrating in this bad matchup to have these types of opening hands post-side, but we can put one of the boils back, and I also decide to put Rankle back. We're going to say, okay, can you beat the Stoneforge Mystic? Can you beat the Batterskull? Just like we did in Game 1. Just like I think we will for a lot of this league, frankly. And then we're going to try to find a spot to boil them. And we do draw a 3rd land for our first draw step, so we're looking like we might be able to boil on curve. And our SFM will resolve, so things are looking like they're going to plan as far as we have one. And once again, we go get Batterskull. Opponent will shock in a Steam Vents, and then they thought about going, passing the turn, I think, and then they decide to just abrade. That's a little bit frightening, because if they abrade an SFM rather than trying to get us to waste our turn vialing in, I always say vialing in, flashing in Batterskull and then abrading that, well, that's a sign that they probably have multiple forms of artifact removal. We have drawn Bonecrusher Giant, which is okay because we don't have a threat otherwise, but right now we are just kind of at the mercy of a deck that lines up very well against mid-range decks on average. They've got the As Foretold, which is pretty rough, straight into the Crashing Footfalls, which is pretty rough, and we don't have much, but the opponent's life total is a little low. We're just going to stomp upstairs, and we do have a Path to Exile to beat the Rhinos. I didn't decide to do it there, partially because it's just kind of like a man play, and we do have enough life of a life buffer that we didn't quite need to. More importantly, it was because I wanted to make sure I had the highest chance possible to draw the 4th land, maybe buy a lot of time with the boil, despite the As Foretold. Again, these are kind of things that are all working a little bit against us, or a little bit at cross purposes with our own deck, and then we draw a Rankle. So we've got totally uncastable stuff. We can play a Bonecrusher Giant or a Path to Exile. Apparently I had enough and I scooped. I don't I don't know if I played it out for another turn or two. Sometimes the replay cuts it a little bit short. In any case, we were pretty much just wrecked here. I think the opponent had all kinds of other stuff in hand. Their progression was really, really strong. We mulled the 5. We couldn't find the rip this time, and we were getting beat down by rhinos, even in the absence of a living end. So, bit of a frustrating one. It was cool to steal game 1 in the way that we did, and it was also unusual. Unfortunately, these post-side games are a little bit more representative, and this is where the lack of focus and the kind of dirtily but also go-wide nature of the Mardu deck really felt painful to me relative to a much more focused, like, Rakdos build, or like a Mardu Moon build. Not that Moon is good here, but with a more clear and coherent plan against the wide and various unfair decks of Modern. Like, if you're against a lot of other fair decks, going wide with Lingering Souls and with all the rest is cool, and you can swing erase or play a combat trick when everybody's attacking and blocking with roughly similar sized threats with your Embercleave and stuff. But against stuff like this, it's just like, we need every advantage we can get, especially when we're mulling, and we did not have those provided to us by our deck, unfortunately, so we get got by the As Foretold combo deck here in round 2. Alright, here we are in round 3, my friends, with a hand that I think we probably have to keep. I hate mulling in blind game 1s. We're really hoping they play to the board with these double fatal pushes. Turn 1 Thoughtseize, obviously, really carrying this hand. Once again, we have lost the die roll. The Urza's Tower opponent has kept 7, so at this point we kind of just hope and pray that it is Eldrazi Tron, otherwise our hand does almost nothing, and at the same time, even if it is Eldrazi Tron, we've got some real issues, so any kind of a Tron opponent keeping 7 against our hand is a little scary. The opponent has nowhere near really assembling Tron. They have 2 Urza's Towers and a Blast Zone, but the rest of their hand is really scary. They've got double Sorcerous Spyglass, so we can't even take one, even if we wanted to. I'm going to more or less disregard that. In fact, I actively want them to have both, because they have a pretty free name if they want of Marsh Flats, and that's fine. Hopefully we'll have enough lands to operate even without it. If we can get Rankle online, we can pitch the dead Marsh Flats and make that Spyglass pretty bad. And maybe we kind of spook them into like a turn 3 Spyglass, naming Liliana of the Veil, for example, something that's not in our deck at all. So I'm definitely not taking a Spyglass here. The big question is whether to take Chalice or whether to take Karn. I wanted to take Karn really, really badly. I hate playing against this card. It's very good against our deck. It's good against midrange in general, but I think very good against our deck. And the big problem is our hand just so happens to be pretty vulnerable to Chalice on 1. So I do feel priced into taking the Chalice, but I don't feel good about it. Back to the opponent. They are going to run out of Tower, run out of Spyglass, name that Marsh Flats. Back over to us, we've drawn Blood Crypt, so we'll just get the Triome down, which will enable us to play Embereth untapped next turn if we want to. And the opponent will play out the Blast Zone, so no blind Spyglass. That's not really working out for us yet. And we draw the 6th land, so not necessarily looking great for us now, is it? And notably, none of them can generate Revolt on their own either, so we're not even holding up a Fatal Push against the opponent having, for example, drawn a 4th land and choosing to lead on the Thoughtseize. So some pretty bad draws from us after a opening hand that's also pretty bad in the matchup. Opponent has found the 4th land. It's an Urza's Mine. Will it be a Thoughtseize? Well, I almost wish it was, but it's not. It is a Karn, and Karn will tick up. Part of my thinking in general with being able to grudgingly justify leaving the Karn is Karn will often tick down for guaranteed value, and then we can kill him on with haste via Rankle. Not to happen here. We also could have, if they ticked up, drawn a Lightning Bolt by now. Bolt him, end step, untap, kill him with Rankle. None of this stuff is going our way. We also could have had something like Dreadbore in hand by now, which would really punish the opponent for simply ticking up and doing it nothing. All that said, none of those things come to pass. We simply have drawn another land, so this is what I mean a little bit about, feeling a bit tilted. honestly ignoring Karn and attacking the opponent with Rankle just because the +1 is so well positioned really did occur to me, but I think we have to get Karn out of there by hook or by crook. So, unfortunately, we're just, again, kind of a haste flyer with Rankle. Opponent will then find the 5th land, take down with Karn for a Sky Sovereign console flagship, which will kill Rankle on ETB. Can we draw anything worthwhile? Well, yes, we can. It is Seasoned Pyromancer. Would have been amazing earlier. Feeling a little bit too late right now, but we definitely have a lot to like. I'm going to choose to pitch one of these Fatal Pushes because I do value going wide in this scenario. We draw Embercleave and Lightning Bolt. Going to bolt Karn before he gets to activate again, and I'm going to run out Arid Mesa in case the opponent's got a Thought-Knots here so we can fetch and Fatal Push. Now, the Embercleave, once again, not able to really help us out when we're behind. Opponent will have another Karn the Great Creator, totally rough, punishing us at every turn here and getting to activate Sky Sovereign, take care of our Spyro, and then play another Sorceress Spyglass, and I did scoop to that to conceal information because the opponent does not know that we are a Stoneforge Mystic deck, and I think that could incentivize them to sideboard differently if they did. So with Spyglass on the stack, I believe I conceded, or at least I tried to, but we are soundly defeated here by Karn, the Great Creator. You do hate to see it, but Sky Sovereign's console flagship, a little bit hard for us to handle when tutored by the Planeswalker there. So, getting beat by Eldrazi Tron with a mid-range deck, what else is new? So sideboarding against Eldrazi Tron, we are trimming around the edges of the go small effects. Cling to Dust, Inquisition of Kozilek, Collective Brutality. A lot of these effects are going to have high chances of whiffing or not lining up, or they're just not really where we want to be. They could be shut off by opposing relics, for example, in the case of Kling. Kaya Orzhov Usurper falls in that category where her -1 doesn't hit enough, and her +1 is not very impactful at all. Shadow Spear is not going to swing erase most of the time against an Eldrazi Tron deck, and Stoneforge Mystic is a little slow, a little clunky, and her, more specifically, the thing she tutors, can incidentally get shut off by Karn the Great Creator. Lingering Souls is a slow, dirtily card that makes very small creatures. Again, I hope you understand why we trim around the edges of a lot of this stuff in this matchup. That said, a lot of these effects are still in. We've got 3 SFM, 3 Equipment still in, 1 Lingering Soul still in, 2 Inquisitions still in, but that's basically the approach here. Coming in from the side, we've got 2 copies of Path to Exile, 3 copies of Cleansing Wildfire, and 3 copies of the various Disenchant Plus effects, so there is a lot to do. Unfortunately, if you look at our opener, it is a 1-lander that cannot cast our Inquisition, and has 2 pieces of equipment in it and a 4-drop threat. So, a disastrous hand, we send it back. And this is a pretty keepable 6, honestly. We'll just put the equipment back. We've got nothing into Wildfire, into Spyro, perhaps into Rankle if we draw a bunch of nothing, or more importantly, or more desirably, if we draw something good to do on turn 3, we can go turn 3, whatever the good thing is, turn 4 Rankle, and turn 5 Spyro to grind the opponent out. That would be ideal. But having mulliganed, we'll see how it all goes. Opponent's got turn 1 Tower into map. We will draw Bonecrusher Giant, so we're just going to Wildfire to slow them down and to see another card, which is Dreadbore, which is not bad. Opponent's got the nuts, though. They've got the most unbeatable card in existence for a mid-range deck. It's turn 2 Matter Shaper. What are we supposed to do? We've drawn Fatal Push, so I think my signal here, one option actually is to just slam a Spyro, go wide, see more cards, and pitch a couple removal spells. I honestly think that's okay, but having drawn so many removal spells, I kind of want them to be on a creature-based plan now, so we're just going to kind of take our lump here, stomp the Reshaper, because other things, of course, that Stomp cannot beat, can be beat by our Dreadbore and our Push, and it also lets us cast a Bonecrusher Giant if we so desire. But that's not the play. Opponent's got a map into Relic, and they're going to say go, so let's just jam a Rankle and see if they've got any kind of removal. Rankle's going to come across the line. They don't have removal, so we're going to tick up, try to work on their hand a bit. At this point, I think pitching push, rather, is the obvious thing to do. We get a Karn the Great Creator out of the opponent's hand. Moral victory secured. A good trade for us as well. Opponent will map into a tower. They're going to play the tower. And by the way, that Karn was their draw off of Reshaper, so we are still a little bit behind, right? But opponents got something to do here. They're tapping out. Eldrazi Temple putting in a lot of work for them. They're casting another Eldrazi ahead of curve. This one is a Reality Smasher. We draw Thoughtseize. It's actually a little sketchy in some ways to cast this, because it is, of course, going to put us to 10, that magical number, making Reality Smashers a lot scarier. But I want to know exactly what our sequencing should be. So we could have Dreadbored, pitching our Thoughtseize to kill the Smasher, and then if we had a 5th land, we could jam the Spyro, but we don't have a 5th land. So instead, I'm going to Thoughtseize to take away a card out of their hand, then I'm going to pitch the Dreadbore to the Spyro, making a token, sacking the token to trade with Reality Smasher off of Rankle's Edict. That is the plan when I Thoughtseize. And now I Thoughtseize and I see a really scary hand. They've got a 5th land, and they've got Ugin the Ineffable, which is a really unbeatable card for us. They've got Reality Smasher. The second one I'm finding really scary as well, despite the fact that we have Rankle on the field. I don't want to put myself in a spot where I'm taking a hit and I'm at 5 and I'm dead for a long, long time to another Smasher off the top. And then there's Karn the Great Creator. And Karn is really, really tough here, simply because if we were not afraid of the card Ensnaring Bridge, I would snap take the Smasher and plan to beat Karn down, and maybe plus it'll be tough for the opponent to protect what they tutor with Karn, because our Rankle is taking up our Rankle is proccing in the way that Liliana would take up to make their hand unsustainable in terms of holding it for the right time. And either way, they are looking like they're going to be clunked up. So with all that in mind, I do decide to take the Smasher, but my second take was the Karn. Either way, I think we're pressuring their hand enough with Rankle that we're hoping they just pitch the Ugin. And we draw another 2 lands off of a Spyro. It happens all the time, it seems, and this was no exception, but it does at least allow us to make a 5th land drop for what that's worth, and also have a pretty free pitch of another land to the Rankle, plus the Rankle proc, and indeed, opponent will pitch Ugin. So, back to them. They're going to play that Blast Zone. They're going to play a Karn the Great Creator. They go tutor Ensnaring Bridge. We do have a lot of outs to it. We do also have discard spells to draw this turn, getting them totally hellbent. Unfortunately, we do neither. So it's time to attack. And I had another bit of a conundrum here, because it's actually not clear that we need to attack the opponent with Rankle, simply because it works to their advantage a little bit with Ensnaring Bridge. A big part of me wants to just kill that Karn while we can, not bother ticking up. We hang on to our Fatal Push that way, but I do say, okay, this is the way to really beat their top decks in their gas, if we can just draw out to Ensnaring Bridge. Like, we're basically establishing a situation where we're both kind of in top deck mode, but our board is huge and they have nothing. So that's the idea here. And then the other option, of course, is to do what we did here. So I think what you don't want to do is do nothing. I think you either need to commit to hoping that your draws are better than theirs and your progression is less clunky than theirs because you're ahead on the board, or you need to commit fully to the attrition plan. I said, all right, let's just keep seeing cards. Let's just keep clunking the opponent up. It's going to make their bridge worse, all the rest. Unfortunately, we just draw another Fatal Push, so we're drawing some reactive cards that don't line up right here near the end. And I did decide to pressure the Karn with Seasoned Pyromancers to prevent more tutoring. But the opponent is rewarded in a lot of important ways here. They're basically finding cheap spells off of the top of their deck. And one of the big things we had going for us is if we're giving them cards, they can still maybe only cast 1 per turn. But the opponent unfortunately gets to play a map and a bridge and hold up the map. They're also going to animate a relic. I do decide to just push it. At least it gives our push something to do, right? And all while doing that, they have managed to shut off our Spyro from attacking. So the gamble of drawing with Rankle did not really pay off here. And we draw a Lingering Souls, the one copy we left in. Not very exciting, but it does give us some interesting, an interesting dimension here in that if they cannot dump their hand out appropriately quickly, the spirits can still attack. So they need to get totally empty-handed. But again, opponent is finding low curve things off the top, so we are pretty well punished. They get to play out their relic. They also have a perfectly timed Thought Knot. How long have we been holding up a push? But now they find it when we are totally tapped out. So, feels bad, man. We do have Lightning Bolt. Time to finally take care of Karn, which, again, we could have done a while ago with Rankle if we'd attacked differently. Back to the OP. On their end step, they get to crack Expedition Map. Now, this is just a tad risky, because if they draw a land for turn, then our spirits get to attack. Now, it's not as risky as it was before because they no longer have a Planeswalker to protect, but still, you know, putting the opponent to 6 is a good way to eventually maybe steal the game. And maybe if they draw runner lands, our spirits could just get over the line, right? So, a bit risky, I think, from opponent to activate there, but you understand why they do. And now they're Tron line, and they've got a bunch of land drops anyway, and we draw a fast land off the top. Couldn't really get any worse. Once again, they will just activate on the end step. Tad risky, but not punished for it. They draw a spell, it's Reality Smasher. We draw another dead one, Inquisition off the top, so it's just back and forth with us doing nothing. We're over a third of the way through our deck, still no out to bridge. Opponent will crack Relic, again putting faith in the fact that they can cast anything they find here, which is fair, and it turns out to be a gigantic Walking Ballista. We're at 8, we draw another fetch land. That's just going to do it, you know? They can wipe our board pretty well, even if we had drawn an answer to it, but we haven't drawn an answer to it, so that is just game. What a feel-bad way to lose, and because we ended up having to pivot from, like, Rankle attrition to Rankle value generation, and we ended up leaving the Karn alone for a little while, even though I don't think that hurt us directly, I came away from this match feeling as though I didn't play it correctly. Looking back right now, I think the only real way in which you could say that I made a questionable decision that impacted directly the outcome of the game was by not Thoughtseizing Karn away. If we had Thoughtseized Reality Smasher away, how does this game look? Well, it definitely looks different. The way both players drew, maybe we would have won that one. So that is the spot that is worth thinking about and re-examining. But talk about a no-win spot. I mean, that's just kind of Eldrazi Tron, like you Thoughtseize their hand and they've got all these bombs that go over the top of you in various different ways. Again, remember that Ugin the Ineffable kind of forced us into the Rankle depletion plan, because that's a card that we don't beat very easily almost ever with a deck like ours. So, again, it's just like, okay, we're getting a bit of the wrong half of the deck problem. We've got a few incongruities with the deck building. We're taking some mulligans, and we're running into some bad matchups. That's all a bit of a stew. When you take it all together, it's all a bit of a recipe for not the very best result of all time. That happened in round 2, happened here again in round 3. We get dumpstered pretty comprehensively by E-Tron. Maybe I could have taken the Karn away to turn the tide of the game. Otherwise, though, leaving that aside, you can see when the opponent's making, 12 mana, and they've got cards like Walking Ballista, Thought Knot, Seer, Reality Smasher, Ensnaring Bridge, Karn the Great Creator. You look at our board, it's just not a matchup that's lining up all that well, all else being equal. Round 4, my friends, with a hand that, like all of our other hands, seems to be very much less than perfect. Thoughtseize into SFM is all well and good, but we don't have a third land, we already have equipment in hand, and drawing 2 Spyros definitely hurts a little bit, unless maybe we're against an opposing discard deck as well, right? Just kind of like not getting things to line up most of the time. But the opponent will mulligan, which definitely benefits us, so here in the blind we go down to 15 to fetch, shock, Thoughtseize, and the opponent's got a real interesting one. We've got a little bit of client lag, which caused me to click through the hand. So let's talk about that. We've got the flip land, Pillar Verge Pathway, which is, among other things, a pretty much a red flag for a Boros Prison deck. That's what I would say anyway. And we see Blood Moon, Pyroclasm, and Worship. So some very Prison-style cards. Worship is the one that gives me pause because, of course, a lot of these types of decks don't play that many creatures. So Worship, although it is a Prison card, it's got an I win button like the Prison decks like to have. Not necessarily the cleanest fit. So I gave this a lot of thought. I was like, all right, well, we can operate through the Blood Moon to a pretty good degree with our hand, because we've got the planes, we can cast SFM, even if they rip a ritual for a turn, we can still cast her, and then any third land is going to let us do the Spyro thing, and we can hard cast the artifacts, we can play through Stoneforge Mystic. There's just so much to do that I don't think I can take the Blood Moon. Can't really bring myself to take Pyroclasm either. You want to, like, one for one our Stoneforge Mystic with it after we have already drawn off of her, sure, that's fine. In a world in which they get to hang on to the Pyroclasm and we have no choice but to go wide with our Spyros, obviously Spyros would get cleaned up by the Pyroclasm, but that's probably not how things are going, and to that end, we do just, as we have so often in this league, play a Stoneforge, go get Batterskull, see if they can beat it. Opponent will play Auriok Champion, which is a really good card against us. Also a card that makes a lot of sense with Worship, so definitely a spicy meatball over there. And one that also does not die to Pyroclasm, right? So things are starting to make sense from our perspective as far as the opponent's concerned. We draw Inquisition. It's a really good time to take away that Pyroclasm or take away the Blood Moon. And the temptation was there, but I'm thinking, once again, we can't really afford to time walk ourselves. I also don't want to Inquisition and see something that I have to take besides Pyroclasm. Then we lose the Stoneforge maybe to the Pyroclasm next turn. Then our Batterskull is stuck in hand. So I think we just have to say, okay, maybe Inquisition will be good next turn. Let's just play through the Skull. But it's not going to be because the opponent moons us. We can no longer cast black spells. And we are all in on this question. Can you beat the Batterskull, all right? So opponent's going to gain a life off of the entry of Mr. Germ to the battlefield. Back over to us, we've drawn Lingering Souls. We are just doing very, very little. The hand continues to be extremely clunky, and the opponent gets free blocks here, but we get free life gain, right? Or no, we don't. Sorry. The protection, definitely strong, but opponent will go for the Pyroclasm. Here's one thing we can do, though. We can flash in that sword, so we've got the Stoneforge Mystic really worth her weight in gold in a few different ways here, under these circumstances where we would otherwise be kind of falling apart with almost nothing to do. Opponent will play the Birth of Meletis, which is a really unusual inclusion. They get to tutor a basic planes with the first part of the saga, then they get to make a wall, and then they get to gain 2 life. Got it. Not that powerful, but doing a lot of things that nominally the deck likes. And now we've got the very best draw we could probably have, which is Bonecrusher Giant. We've already kind of bluff attacked once, so the opponent's not suspicious here, and they'll assign the block just as they should, right? They should definitely make us have it, but we do have it. We have drawn the Stomp. Stomp says damage can't be prevented this turn, which is the whole reason protection lines up in combat like that, and we get to gain the life. We get to deal with the Auriok Champion. Opponent gets to make a wall. They're going to play a plains, and they're going to say go, and they still have a Pillar Verge pathway in hand with 1 unknown. We've drawn a third land, and it is a Marsh Flats, which is going to be just a mountain here. So we could just slam a Spyro. I think that would be okay, but I think it is better to equip Feast and Famine. Number 1, it is going to guarantee this block. Number 2, it's going to give us a ton of life. And number 3, it is nearly as mana efficient as casting a Spyro. And on the off chance that they did not assign the block, well, we would get to untap our lands and play the Spyro second main phase anyway, right? But opponent will just hang on to their land after gaining 2 life off of the saga and then do nothing. So we are drawing some more dead ones, but that's why Seasoned Pyro is in the deck. It's so good. We get to loot away a push and an Inquisition, and we're nice and wide. We're making a land drop as well. Still mostly locked out by Moon, but it doesn't really matter that much. Germ with the dual wield is going to connect. We are at 31 life. We are untapping lands. Opponent's got to pitch a Pyroclasm, even though our board is pretty wide. And for fear of another Pyroclasm, basically, and for the fact that, like, you were so far ahead, you can justify playing any threat there, we do run out Bonecrusher rather than, for example, Lingering Souls. But opponent's going to next level us. We thought they might be hanging on to a high curve spell based on their sequencing, and it turns out they are. It is Blasphemous Act. So Blasphemous Act dealing 13 damage to every creature, gonna go ahead and wipe our board. But we do have a couple of equipments that of course survive that, and now we got the chance to lead on another Spyro, so that's what we'll do. And pitching Lingering Souls is actually not good here, even though normally it would be, because we cannot flash it back. We can only cast the front half. So, and after having drawn 2 cards off Spyro, that is still the case. So Spyro digging us through the deck, as he usually does. We'll use our spare mana after a land drop to equip, pass it back over to OP. They have found a Worship, so that's definitely a card that could be scary if they find another hard or impossible to kill creature. We found Rankle, which is sweet, but we do need, of course, to find a couple of swamps in order to cast Rankle, right? So let's just begin by equipping the Batterskull to Spyro. I don't think there's anything I was afraid of. You know, they would have... it was already a 4/4. They didn't have white open, so no path or anything like that. So we get a pretty free equip here. We get to go up to 39 life, and then we get to untap. And rather than cast the souls, number 1, it conceals information. Number 2, it plays better around a sweeper effect to have the Spyro tokens in the back pocket. So that's what we're doing. We're holding up the tokens for the opponent's end step. Opponent's going to go light up the stage into Giver of Runes and Path to Exile. So Path is confirmed. Giver is an interesting one. Definitely you can see how Giver plus whatever plus Worship is a good way to stop the opponent from winning. End step, we will make those tokens, though, and the opponent's got to have exactly Lightning Bolt here once we move a sword over. So we know they're going to path a Spyro, but if we move a sword over to the Elemental and they can't remove it, we've got lethal anyway. So that's what we do. The opponent scoops to that. Definitely an interesting game, and this is one that really, I would say, rewarded us for splashing white, because Stoneforge Mystic just soloed them. She traded X for 1, she allowed us to play really efficiently, cheat on mana multiple times, and the things that she tutored ended up winning the game. That said, the presence of a third color in our deck does make us more vulnerable to Blood Moon. Maybe if we were on straight Rakdos, we could have actually cast more spells, still been fine in the matchup, I'm not sure. But Stoneforge Mystic here, you cannot deny, was the MVP, no question about it. Spyro running her a very, very close second, making Blood Moon not that big a deal, because you're giving us the red mana, we'll use it to cast a Spyro, we'll turn our dead cards into 1/1 elementals, we'll keep seeing fresh ones. This is the type of thing that our deck was designed to do. Some heavy sideboarding here against Red-White Prison, my friends, and some really interesting sideboarding, at least if you ask me. We are doing a whole lot here, so I feel obligated to bring in Paths to Exile to deal with the opposing Auriok Champions, and also I'm bringing in my own Auriok Champions because they seem pretty good against their whole deck, besides, again, maybe Path to Exile. We've also got all of our Disenchant plus effects to deal with Blood Moon and Worship and whatever else they might be playing. And on top of that, we have brought in 2, but not the full 3 copies of Cleansing Wildfire, because I'm very interested in fixing my own mana under an opposing Blood Moon, but they're also a Path to Exile deck, so I don't necessarily want to do that to myself multiple times. Therefore, I'm not bringing in 3, we're only bringing in 2. I'm cutting all my Fatal Pushes here. Even though they showed us Giver of Runes, we have reason to believe it is pretty dead otherwise. We have Cling to Dust, it's just pretty cuttable, and Collective Brutality, ditto. You know, these cards are okay, both of those are okay, but I think Kaya Orzhov Usurper was interesting, but ultimately a little tough to cast under a Blood Moon, perhaps more than anything, is what made her kind of edged out with other similarly powered and similarly well-positioned effects remaining in the deck, because they're a little easier to cast. A couple Dreadbores can also go, as far as I saw from Game 1, that's okay. And I do cut Embercleave, even though it's eminently castable under a Blood Moon, rather than Shadow Spear. It's just pretty bad when they're sweeping the board so often to play this go-wide necessary combat trick and speed up the clock a little bit. Also, with that Worship, I have reason to assume that they have other creatures in the deck that we haven't seen. I wanted to leave in Shadow Spear just in case it lined up well at being hexproof, removing hexproof rather, or indestructible, and as a way not to lose to worship. So, what do we think about our opening hand? Well, it looks odd, but I actually think it's a keep. Because we once again showed that Stoneforge Mystic on curve is the key to victory in many of these types of matchups. If we draw any kind of a black land, we get to Thoughtseize, and we also have Auriok Champion in hand, a potentially powerful, impactful sideboard card. If the worst happens and none of that really is castable, any third land, even if we're getting Blood Moon, will let us do the Spyro thing, but really Stoneforge Mystic is the most important keep. Also the desire not to mulligan when our own deck is a little bit all over the place, right? Like, we're doing a lot of really good things here, but we also need we need to be flush with resources, if you ask me. Opponent, speaking of flush with resources, will keep 7, but look at us, never didn't have a swamp off the top. Literally our best possible draw, I would assume. Opponent does have a Blood Moon. Now that we've got the Swamp, I don't think we care that much. They've got Boros Reckoner, which combos with Blasphemous Act to just dome us for 13 while sweeping the board, and also is a 3/3 that can be given first strike in general. Surviving Pyroclasm, a really cool fit from the opponent. They've also got a Hushbringer, 1/2 flying lifelink. Creatures entering the battlefield are dying, don't cause abilities to trigger. Well, there goes Stoneforge Mystic, there goes Auriok Champion, and there goes Spyro as far as their use cases go. There's also a Path to Exile. I think we've actually got to take Hushbringer. Feels weird to take such a fragile threat away when we've got a deck full of kill spells, but we're not as flush with them post-side maybe as we were in Game 1. So, pretty happy to take that. OP draws another kind of must-answer threat in the form of Giver, but we draw Inquisition, so definitely a really nice one. Still thought about just jamming Stoneforge Mystic, but I said, nah, let's use the Inquisition while it's good, while we know we've got good hits, and Boros Reckoner is the one I want to take here. We're at risk of just, like, them having too many creatures of any kind for us to beat, because we don't have kill spells, so if we can trade like that, I think that's definitely where we want to be. Opponent will smash us with the Giver, and then they actually don't want to play the Blood Moon. The Blood Moon's going to lock them out of white. That's another thing that I identified during the match, but forgot to mention just now. They don't have a Plains. We do. We've got a Plains and a Swamp, so opponent not even really feeling able to cast their Blood Moon. We draw Bonecrusher Giant. Very tempting to stomp the Giver. I don't for two reasons. Number one, we know that Stoneforge Mystic is good here, we know it's going to resolve, and we know that it has at least a decent chance of forcing some kind of action from the opponent, and if it doesn't, we do have the chance of snowballing with Batterskull. Number two, we do want to save the stomp, if we can, for an opposing Auriok Champion, just like we did in Game 1. So, opponent will actually, on the end step, path their own Giver. Makes actually a lot of sense, because now they've got a Plains and now they can slam the Blood Moon with impunity. In a vacuum, that makes sense. In practice, you know, again, I've got all three of my colors. I don't necessarily care. We can't cast a lot of our extreme color requirement cards, and as it so happens, we're drawing into them. We've got both Aurioks plus a Rankle in hand. Nevertheless, I'm feeling pretty okay. OP's only got 2 cards in hand. One of them's another Giver of Runes. Sure, you got it. And on our end step, of course, we are going to throw good old Batterskull onto the battlefield for the nth time this league. We have drawn Cleansing Wildfire as if we didn't care about the Blood Moon enough. You know, now we really don't care about it. But at the same time, our hand is still clunky. Still clunky. There's a lot we can't do. I almost wish we had another piece of equipment just to be holding up that ability, but basically we're holding up Bonecrusher Giant Stomp right now. So, opponent's got a Stony Silence, definitely an interesting one, but in some ways the damage has already been done. So, just for the sake of efficiency and to help win the race, we are going to Stomp on the end step. Opponent's still got 1 unknown in hand. We draw Savai Triome, and that is our second red land that we need for a Spyro. So, we're going to begin with him, and we're going to pitch some of the uncastables, 1 Auriok, and Rankle. I thought about pitching both Aurioks, but there are ways in which we get out from underneath a Blood Moon and maybe want to cast Auriok, and we have found one of them. It is a Wear and Tear, and I think on average this card is a lot harder for them to beat than Rankle. especially because they're already pretty much hellbent. So that was the thinking there, but picking both Aurioks would have been just fine too. Anyway, we found the second Rankle and a Wear and Tear, so we're rewarded for the pitch in a couple different ways. And Stoneforge and Batterskull going to battle together. OP plays another land, they're a bit flooded, we've drawn a Thoughtseize. Let's see what that last card in their hand is. That's what we've been waiting for, and it is a path to exile that opponents been remaining as disciplined as possible with, but they now have to point it at the Germ. We flesh it out here. Our Thoughtseize will whiff. I think it's going to be okay, right? I think it's going to be okay. We're just going to play a Bonecrusher Giant here to beat Pyroclasm, which is something that we might be kind of making them have. Blasphemous Act would be better, but Pyroclasm would be something that would be a really good top deck for them, and wouldn't you know it, that's what they find. So good thing we played Bonecrusher there. We've still got a 4-3 on the field, and check it out. We draw Fetid Heath. That doesn't do anything, right? Well, we can cast Rankle because we've got double Swamp now, and that's awesome. Is that a stylish way to win? I would say so. You know what might be even more stylish is Wear and Tear, even though... No, it didn't really have two targets. So Wear and Tear, just the tear side, you know? Just a single white to get rid of the Stony Silence, enabling us to Batterskull equip the Bonecrusher Giant. I think that's pretty cool. I think swinging with Rankle is definitely cool. Maybe this was a little bit cooler. So we had a lot of decisions to make here. I don't think any of them were that hard to make. I think our signals here were relatively clear all throughout, and the nature of the opponent's deck was such that they, it seems, couldn't cleanly handle the equipment. That was the big problem. Their Blood Moon also was a non-entity for the most part, given our Game 1 progression of Stoneforge and equipment into Spyros, and our Game 2 natural drawing of the basic lands, very luckily. And that is definitely something that the opponent really needs, I think, to line up. If they're not really mooning people out, and otherwise they're presented with things that are difficult for them to deal with, the games are going to end up looking a lot like this. So despite the fact that for most of both of these games we actually had a lot of uncastable cards in hand, it didn't really matter. And that goes back to my point in the deck tech about card quality. The card quality of our progressions here was really high. We saw discard spells at the right time. Basic lands happen to have a high card quality, although that's, you know, maybe a little bit of a stretch, but hope you understand the point. And the card quality of Stoneforge Mystic, Seasoned Pyromancer, maybe a little bit of Bonecrusher Giant's card quality as well, definitely just carrying us over the line here. So we are 2-2. We have at least partially cashed the league, and we are seeing some interesting scenarios unfold with our Mardu midrange deck. Final round here, my friends, is against Dr. Queller, who I believe is number 2 or so on the leaderboard, a Spirits player, a very talented one, one that I have played before, and with that knowledge, I think our opening hand's pretty darn good. We got Push and Bolt, we've got the ubiquitously good, it seems, turn 2 Stoneforge Mystic, and then we've got the top end of Spyro, and definitely feeling pretty good about this hand, given the opponent, what we suspect they'll be playing, and indeed it is Spirits, and they run out something that's pushable turn 1. I do think on average it is better to push than to bolt here, because without the ability to guarantee a revolt in future turns, there are going to be some things that push does not hit all of their 3-drops, basically, whereas bolt will kill all of their 3-drops. But we draw another lightning bolt, so life is good. We're going to go ahead and SFM on curve, of course, though, into Batterskull, following the same cue of our hand. You know, when we're not really curving out, what else are we supposed to get, right? Opponent's just going to run out a Supreme Phantom. Speaking of curving out, we do. Very nice. So we get to bolt the Phantom, and we get to flash in the Batterskull, while also representing other removal. Life is good. So opponent's going to make the 3rd land drop themselves, play a Mausoleum Wanderer, and say go. And here comes the Batterskull. So back over to us. We've drawn Bonecrusher Giant, more removal. Life is good. We're going to go ahead and swing. You know, swinging first I think is really good practice there. And then I sat here and thought. And I made what is... I don't know. I think I made on average the statistically wrong decision. I don't think I played it well afterwards. I remember being like, wow, that was a disaster when I did it. But basically, I sat here thinking for a little while about, okay, what are the odds they have Rattle Chains versus what are the odds they have Spell Queller? And if they have Spell Queller, I'm just afraid basically of them drawing lands and me not drawing lands and me improbably losing due to being unable to deal with a Queller. Whereas if we force an issue now with the Rattle Chains, at least we kind of know what's going on. And I thought maybe they're a little less likely to have the Rattle Chains given their sequencing, but I think ultimately it was just bad. Ultimately, like, we're the ones asking the questions on the board. So, of course, we do get punished by main phasing the Bolt. You know what? Main phasing the Bolt was bad, too. If we were going to test them for Rattle Chains versus Queller, we should definitely have waited until their upkeep. So this whole sequence was just really bad. And then I make it worse by just stomping here, but the opponent gets to counter it with Mausoleum Wanderer, meaning we lose our Giant. So we got 2-for-1, and we did it at the opponent's kind of convenience on our own end step, basically, or on our own turn. And on top of that, we don't have the back half of the Giant to play. So just a very bad play for me. What can I say? I hope somebody out there learns from this. Again, if you wanted to understand or to test them for Rattle Chains specifically, we should do it on their upkeep. Because maybe they don't want to time walk themselves and they just flash in their Rattle Chains anyway. And then we get to respond, and then things are going a little bit better for us. So just a disastrous play top to bottom. My apologies for that. In practice, I was pretty tilted by the time it got to this. I think I was coming straight off of the 2 losses to Eldrazi Tron and As Foretold combo. So I just wasn't having much fun. I just made a blunder. And the opponent's got a Skyclave Apparition, and they do take away Stoneforge Mystic, interestingly. You know, not Batterskull or anything like that, but they might have other plans for that. And despite the blunder, despite the bad play with my removal, we have at least traded a little bit. We've successfully traded with 1 push and with 1 bolt, and we've got the Germ on the field, so we're definitely doing a lot. So we draw another Concealed Courtyard to go with our 2 Seasoned Pyromancers in hand. My play here is going to be to equip, to force the block, and if they don't decide to block, if they want to keep their spirit count high, well, then we'll get to untap. It's kind of something similar that we did earlier in the league, where if they're chump blocking, we're winning. If they're not chump blocking, we're really winning, right? This is all assuming they didn't have anything. As it turns out, they didn't have anything, so pretty good for us. We're just chugging along the ground, doing something they can't handle, making a gigantic life swing a feature of our every turn. On their end step, they get to play everything through Rattle Chains with Flash, so they do flash in a Queller. One of the reasons also, I do give myself credit here, even though I'm playing badly this game, one of the reasons that we also sequenced with the equip rather than the cast is, of course, because we were playing around Spell Queller there too. So forcing the opponent to flash in the Queller as a beater when we're this far ahead on life is a huge win, and they will indeed sit back with a Queller. We rip Inquisition off the top. Pretty well timed if you ask me. You know, maybe it's going to whiff, maybe not. Either way, we know exactly what's going on. We clear the way for a Spyro. So opponent can flash in a Skyclave Apparition, which you have to say is a little bit brutal. Once again, they don't take the Batterskull. This time, we have the mana open to bounce it back to hand. That said, it would have been a very dangerous play for us to do so. I might not have done so anyway. But in any case, taking the sword is maybe from their perspective just as good as taking the other piece of equipment, so you do understand that. But we do nab a Supreme Phantom, that's really nice. And then we're attacking with the Germ. Again, this is a win-win. If they don't block, great. If they do block, great. So they do block. Again, you understand it. In a way, they're kind of sending mixed messages by not taking our Batterskull either time, but then, you know, having to kind of trade with it. So it's just our Stoneforge Mystic-based progression has just put the opponent in a non-win situation. Making a 3/3 illusion token off of that trade is pretty nice. We get to play a Spyro into another Spyro and a Lightning Bolt. Sometimes, my friends, you do just kind of have it all. So opponent will crack a Canopy land, play a tap land. It's all not good enough for them. We untap, we draw Kaya, which is another pretty sweet one. Opponent doesn't make us figure out how best to win the game. They're just going to scoop. So I have been critical of some of the aspects of this build relative to other aspects that we could otherwise be leveraging. I do feel it's pretty well positioned against decks like this, mostly. But we do have to acknowledge that Batterskull is more, strangely, a better aggressive card than a defensive card, just because it can't block any of their flyers, right? So the fact that we were able to take the front foot here was crucial in terms of making our stuff good. But honestly, we have a pretty good Game 1 matchup. We also should be pretty well configured post-side. Well, you know, I did just say it gets better for us post-side, but we end up with some relatively conservative sideboarding. Again, as I said in the deck tech, this is a matchup where I would love a Braids and Kolaghan's commands instead of the configuration that we have, which is just another reason why, you know, like the Rakdos color pairing is really coherent right now. With all due respect to the immense power that we've seen from Stoneforge Mystic, who has been one of the MVPs, for sure. But anyway, back to the sideboarding. We cut a single Cling. They could be on a Rest in Peace. We hope they are. Again, part of our configuration strength is that it's not that graveyard dependent. We cut a Thoughtseize, which I think is about right against a Blue-White Spirits deck in a vacuum. And we also cut an Embercleave, which I think is just kind of inferior to our other options under these circumstances. Coming in from the side, we have 2 Paths to Exile and an Engineered Explosives. I did also consider a couple of Auriok Champions simply as a early play that gains a lot of life over the course of the game to help swing the race. I ended up saying, let's see how that looks post-side. I think we have a really strong 60 to begin with. Maybe we err on the side of being more conservative, but, you know, and then some of our, like, less impactful top-end cards in general, they at least have flying, you know, Lingering Souls, Rankle, these cards all fly, right? So it was a bit of a toss-up as to whether or not to to play the Aurioks. I decide not to. I actually thought about cutting a Seasoned Pyromancer here as well, because unlike the other slower top-end things, it is along the ground. It doesn't block, right? So as much as I think it's like the literal strongest card in our deck, maybe alongside SFM, you know, I could see cutting one here as well. So ultimately, we do go with some conservative sideboarding, and we've got the triple Spyro, 1 black land opener. We've got Inquisition, we've got Push. I was really tempted to keep this. If we draw runner lands, we're off to the races, right? If the second land is red on the second turn, we're going to be fine, at least for a little while. But again, that fail rate is there. I don't want to give myself an automatic loss, so we do mulligan. Again, I think our 60 is really strong. We can afford to take a mulligan if the alternative is maybe setting up for a free loss, never drawing a second land. So we've got a really nice looking 6. We've just got to bottom one of these lands in my view. It's going to be the Pain land. It's going to be the one where the life totals really add up. So the progression is going to be Inquisition into Stomp. We've got Path and Spyro in the back pocket if we draw a third land, and for the former if it's white. OP goes Moorland Haunt into Aether Vial. We've drawn Lightning Bolt. Again, a pretty nice find. Opponent's got a second Vial, a Spectral Sailor, and a Skyclave Apparition. And 2 lands, of course. It's an interesting call. We do end up taking the Apparition, but I was pretty close to not taking it. I was pretty close to saying, okay, you know, we might not present a target for that for a while. It could make their life really tough, but at the end of the day, we do decide to play a little bit more for the long game. Opponent will run out another Vial, they'll say go, we'll draw a third land, that's a beautiful thing. So we're holding up Stomp, Bolt, Path, but realistically just kind of holding up Stomp. Opponent does not flash in Spectral Sailor, and that makes some sense because they're setting it up so that they can maybe get a draw off of it if they leave this other Vial at 1. And they might also Time Walk us here depending on what they have drawn, and indeed they do nothing. So some savvy play, I think, there from the opponent. I would have stomped that thing on site if they'd run it out, so I guess we have to say that it was. Back to us, we've drawn Inquisition. So, a pretty well-timed one. We get to force things out of their hand, and we get to see exactly how well they have drawn since we left them with very little going on in hand. So they'll flash in the Spectral Sailor. The nightmare here is that they have a really good 2-drop to flash in that they've drawn, and indeed it looks as though they do. It is a Rattle Chains. So, Rattle Chains is a bit of a problem. We do go for the Lightning Bolt. Why did I go for the Bolt there? Well, in case their last card was Spell Queller, I didn't want the Queller to go unchecked this turn either. So even though the Stomp would have been more mana efficient, we're also holding up Path this way for whatever else they could just flash in, you know, because with Rattle Chains on the field, they can now flash in response to Inquisition. They do just have another land. It's a second copy of Moorland Haunt. So as it turns out, we might have been a little more rewarded for playing the Stomp, but not to know that, and I think this is totally fine on the whole. So the question then becomes, after they activate Haunt here, which I think our client is trying to allow them to do, do we path Rattle Chains before they get to draw another Rattle Chains or a Queller? I decide not to. It's just not that much of a must-answer card in and of itself. You want to answer all spirits, right? But they can play everything at instant speed anyway. So I don't think Rattle Chains is doing enough to warrant a straight-up path when we can have other ways to deal with it more easily in our hands, save a path for a must-kill threat. We draw another Spyro. So now we're going to go for the Stomp. We're going to see if the opponent has drawn anything. Of course they have. They're gassing out really well given how little action they had at the beginning. It is a Spell Queller. Thankfully, we are able to answer it, and we are able to then subsequently cast the Stomp, kill the Rattle Chain. So we've taken care of their whole board. And they're playing totally off the top. With 2 1/1s in hand, we've got a 4/3 and 2 Spyros waiting in the wings. The big problem, though, is Moorland Haunts letting them grind, and the opponent's been top-decking pretty darn well. They're also doing everything entirely at instant speed, and wouldn't you know it, we draw the 3rd straight Spyro. Maybe the 2nd straight with 1 in hand, I don't recall exactly. But it's just so bad. It's just so rough. But at this point, I'm thinking, you know what? Maybe we just need to see as many new cards as possible anyway. So we go ahead and play out of land. We've got Kaya in hand. It's just all very clunky, though, you know? And as it turns out, the if we had just drawn this stuff in a slightly different order, it would represent an insanely OP progression. As it is, we've got, like, the right half of the deck in the wrong order, if that makes any kind of sense. Opponents found a Shacklegeist, which is actually a quite strong card against us. Not the worst in terms of going our go-wide progression, but it's definitely going to help the opponent race us here. And right now, racing is one of our only hopes. But we're operating now off a Sunbaked Canyon. The opponent's got a Shacklegeist. They did draw a land, though, so we've got an opening. We've got an opening. Can we find anything really impactful? Well, it's not that. It's a Fatal Push. I'm just going to Fatal Push here, and then we're going to play the Kaya. The problem with Kaya, though, is if Kaya ticks up trying to gain life and get rid of their graveyard, they can just activate Moorland Haunt in response. So we could tick up to gain some life on our side of the field, you know, exile a spell and a Spyro, maybe. And then I think they might just ignore Kaya. So I think that was a bit of a borderline decision either way, but I decided let's just tick down, kill a spirit. We've got to kill these things at some point anyway, basically. We don't have a card like Plague Engineer in the deck, unfortunately, which would be a total hoser in this matchup. So let's just gain some life with Kaya, basically, by killing one token and drawing the attacks out of the others. And indeed, that's what they do. It's good enough for me, but it's not good enough to win the match in and of itself. We draw Fetid Heath. So what do? Well, we're just kind of trying to race, and we're going to see if this attack draws anything out of the opponent, because they just passed with a card in hand. No such luck, so we crack Sunbaked Canyon, we find yet another land. It's all a little bit rough, and all we can really do is cast Bonecrusher Giant. Hope they don't have a Lord to Violin. They don't, so we're not dead right now. But we'll see what the opponent's got going on. It's, again, we need to fade a Lord. We do, but they put us to 2. Back to us, we draw Batterskull. It's so rough because we're so close. We're attacking for 8. They're dead to any burn spell. They're also dead to some life gain, like Collective Brutality escalating, assuming it resolves, you know, stuff like that. Wouldn't even need to escalate it, right? You could just outright kill them. But we swing back, opponents at 2, we're at 2, we're the ones who die. They're just that one step ahead of us. I think if we were on the play, we win this game, heads up. I think if we didn't mulligan, we win this game. I think if we didn't draw all 3 Spyros all together, we win this game. Like if we had had 1 later instead of all 3 at the same time. Also, probably if we were not a 3-color deck, we would win this game, because we would not have taken, if we had just taken 2 fewer points off of our life total, we would have won. Maybe if we didn't mulligan, we would have won as well. So close, yet so far. Spirit squeaking over the line here against us. Well played from the opponent. Also, there's every chance, as always, I could have sequenced differently as well to get us over the line. But we got pretty darn close here, but as it turns out, there's going to be a game 3. Alright, so after that narrow loss at the hands of Moorland Hunt, as much as anything, we make a slight sideboard tweak. We cut one of our 4 Spyros for fear of exactly that happening. Also for the concern I mentioned earlier about it just not being able to block in the air. And we bring the Cling to Dust back to compete over the graveyards a bit, and just as a way to curve out a little bit more reliably on the play. We're no longer suspecting them at all, really, for Rest in Peace. We've got a strange one. We've got a functional hand that goes nothing into Mystic, into Spyro pitching Souls maybe, or into Souls Spyro turn 4. And given how badly our mulligans have turned out, and given how powerful Stoneforge Mystic on the curve has been, especially on the play, we do decide to keep it. But I do recognize that keeping a hand without any kill spells against spirits is a little bit sketchy, but this is the type of hand, and being on the play, of course, is a factor as well, that you could really potentially justify doing so, and in this case we did. So opponent's got keeping 7, turn 1 Vial. We've got EE. Okay, so if they're on another double Vial progression like they were in game 1, we're actually going to be able to clean that up really nicely. But as it is, we just go SFM, go get Batterskull, the usual plan. You know, we really do miss Sword of Fire and Ice here. I'm never justifying getting Shadow Spear or Embercleave in these situations over Batterskull, but I could justify getting Sword of Fire and Ice, and that gives us a lot of different game in matchups like this when you have Stoneforge Mystic but low on removal especially. So we decide, okay, we're not going to run out and kill the Vial just yet. Let's just play another tapped land. Of course, it sucks to have drawn another land. And we're going to do the Batterskull thing. Opponent will Vial in Mausoleum Wanderer. So this does work to our advantage a bit if we're looking for an excuse to get the Vial. Now we can get at least a 2-for-1, maybe a 3-for-1, depending on what they do. But they do some pretty scary things. They tick up to 2. They make the 3rd land drop. They play Kira the Great Glass Spinner, which is a really, really good card against us. And also another Shacklegeist, which is a scary one against Batterskull specifically, because it's a good way to kind of keep it from snowballing the game. So we go for it, because that's just what we're doing. And then back to the opponent, or excuse me, back to us. We draw another land. The Flood is real, my friends. The Flood is very real. We go to attacks. Germ gets tapped down, but hey, let's bash in with a Squire, right? There's no reason not to right now. And then what do we do here? So this is actually a really intriguing decision. I almost played EE on 3. EE on 3, taking care of Kira Great Glass Spinner 1-for-1. It's just so slow. It's just so slow. So a way to make it less slow and to say, okay, we are keeping the board as clear as possible in order to make the Kira's ability less relevant, because we can just erase you with Batterskull and then have the time to like make a wide board with Souls, draw some new cards with Spyro. I do decide on the latter course of action, which is to 2-for-1 them with an EE on 1, taking care of Mausoleum Wanderer and taking care of Ether Vial. Again, really slowing them down, really 2-for-1ing them, and that is the hope here, that that's going to lead us to a Batterskull-derived victory, basically. Opponent's going to swing in with Shacklegeist, so you know they have at least one other card to play for the tap down, and unfortunately it is Skyclave Apparition. Once again, they decline to take care of the Batterskull. They, I guess, are all in on the idea of being able to tap it down forever. They take Stoneforge Mystic. I find that interesting, but we do fetch, and let's untap. We draw Dreadbore. Kira obviously making that bad where it would otherwise be quite good. We go to attacks. Here comes the Shacklegeist. Tap down again. Shacklegeist is a kind of frustrating card to play against, but it is pretty cool, don't get me wrong. Definitely not hating, but, you know, specifically against our progression, we're getting our spells locked out, our interaction locked out by Kira, and our attacks locked down, but that's kind of the tempo game that Spirits can play. So, rather than, say, Spyro pitching cards, I say, you know what's really good against a bunch of Spirits that do not have Lords yet, but have a lot of other effects? Army of Spirits of my own, right? So that's definitely a pretty cool play. I think casting Lingering Souls there is correct. Opponent will cast another Shacklegeist, then they're passing, holding up Horizon Canopy, representing Spellqueller, 2 with their 1 unknown in hand. Sadly for us, we draw yet another land. I do decide to play it and to crack it, putting faith in our deck, and having a critical mass of really good things to do, rather than Spyro looting a couple lands away. Also, a little reluctant to put my only piece of gas into the loving embrace of a potential spell queller. But having drawn Stoneforge Mystic, I'm like, okay, if this draws out the queller, maybe something, maybe our Spyro can resolve next turn and we'll take it from there. I go get Shadow Spear here. We are mindful of the ability to race the opponent in a couple different ways now. Shacklegeist, of course, though, keeping our Germ tapped down. And it's definitely a really complicated game to play here at the moment, but these end-step Shacklegeist activations are pretty wild, and then opponent finds a path to exile too. So they are dealing with our stuff, and now they look like they're pivoting to the ability to close out the game. And helping them greatly in that endeavor is the draw of a Lord off the top, which is a little bit rough. I am glad we played Lingering Souls, though. They're still holding back the attack. Opponent attacks along the ground with Apparition. I think that is a smart attack, and I think I'm not supposed to block. I think losing Spirits is too high a price to pay. You know, double block with Spirits plus a Stoneforge Mystic. The Spirits will probably be the ones that die, right? But definitely was a block that was at least a little bit on the table. We draw another Spyro. Once again, like, having two around is just, like, not the very greatest. I actually thought this was such a skill-testing game, and I wasn't in my best possible mental state to play it, I'll be honest, or physical state either. But I thought about pitching Marsh Flats and Spyro. Because, number one, again, the Spyros along the ground, they're not that useful anymore. And broadly not that useful in the matchup. And then if we draw like a push, or a path, we can use one of them on the cure and then Dreadbore to get through, and then we can start drawing more removal and start actually killing the Spirits, which is something we generally do need to do in the matchup. But another thing to do is just to say, okay, we've got enough blockers, we've got enough life gain effects on the field, let's just keep going wide, let's just keep outvaluing them seeing new cards. So I do decide to pitch the Dreadbore, but that was definitely borderline, and we're rewarded in at least one way. We draw a Castle Embereth, which is actually a really good way to potentially win this race here, and especially when paired with life gain effects. And it lets us cast another Spyro. And we've got a path to exile, so now the big problem is the Lord, because the Lord makes their clock better, the Lord makes the trades worse for us, and also now the Lord makes Kira survive Stomp. So we could still use the Stomp to draw out, but then we're pathing them into a land, which is not free either. It's just, like, there's just a lot going on here, right? Sorry, I'm starting to run my thoughts together here at the end of this replay. Hope you guys have been having fun. But anyway, the opponent's got a Moorland Haunt, which is rough, which is another rough thing. And it's right on time when we're starting to have to actively consider making trades to really outgrind us. The presence of that Moorland Haunt is one factor here, among others, that leads me, after some deliberation, to say, you know, I think I'm just supposed to go to one. I'm supposed to take this. I'm supposed to try to have a huge swing on the crackback, or to have enough to do. And the opponent on the other turn that we are able to make blocks here, we are forcing them to tap down things that are less optimal to be tapped down. Now, we draw Fetch Land, which is a disaster because it does absolutely nothing. So my thinking here is, all right, let's equip. And then I thought about, again, the Bonecrusher Giant, the Path to Exile play. I'm getting a little bit low on the clock. I decide to go for a Batterskull equip here. Why? Well, this does kind of force the opponent to tap this down. If we're forcing the opponent to tap that down, we know that a couple things are going to happen. Number one, we know that the Spyro is going to connect and also gain us some life, which is going to, in turn, help us. Like, that was just such a positive trade for us on so many levels. Number two, it is forcing the opponent to find something to kill us on the crackback with that they don't currently have, simply because we have forced the tap down on the Batterskull, making them unable to tap down spirit tokens on the end step as they otherwise would. So we run out that, finally, we can now, in theory, fetch Shock Path. But in practice against Kira, that doesn't do anything. But in any case, opponent, I think I maybe have gone too quickly back through this to have done the math. which maybe I should have given the benefit of a replay. But I think the idea here was making the opponent find a lord. And they found a lord, and that's pretty rough. And they also can make a spirit off of Moorland Haunt, meaning that the 2 summoning sick creatures via the power of Shacklegeist get to tap down a blocker, and also meaning that their attackers are crucially 4/4s, and that is just too much for us to block. So again, if they didn't have a lord, we're kind of back where we started. I think we'd be at 1 life if they swung out, and that would have been something very different. But as it is, we do lose narrowly in 2 post-side games to Dr. Queller. This was narrow, even though the life totals were not, because remember, we've got the ability to kill them on the crackback overwhelmingly with Castle Embereth, we've got lifelink effects, we've got a lot going on. There are a few different ways I could have sequenced here. Once I chose to pitch the Dreadbore, we were a little bit more all-in, I think, on the type of lines we took, but it was really skill testing. It was honestly a little bit rough, too. The opponent's progressions were really strong. I don't think they mulliganed at all. We took some mulls. We kept a no-kill spell opening hand that, again, Stoneforge Mystic almost ran away with. It was definitely a really, really close one here. I do wonder if we had access to Sword of Fire and Ice, if we could have just completely rolled this matchup. I'm not certain, but that is definitely something that occurs to me. But the opponent with Shacklegeist able to keep our Batterskull at bay, able to really tap us down repeatedly, kind of tempo us out, chip in here, chip in there. A really impressive display, you have to say, from the Spirits deck. Shacklegeist OP, and I don't necessarily feel that I deserved a match win here given the misplay in round 1. And my uncertainty about some of the lines here in round 3. So this one is one that I'm happy to lose. I guess Spirits is a cool deck. I really had a lot less fun at the time in the Eldrazi Tron matchup and the As Foretold matchup. Those are 2 boogeyman decks for me. They're 2 really bad matchups for this deck. In between that and some of the variants we had in those, that's where my tilt factor came in. This was definitely one that I'm a lot happier to lose, but we do unfortunately finish below par here with a good old 2 and 3. Alright guys, so that was our league, and I'm very glad we got a few good moments with Rankle. I'm also glad we got to connect once with Embercleave. Those were some of the spicier cards that we like to see. And Lingering Souls was okay here, too. When we found them, they were in situations where it's like, you know, this is actually pretty relevant. Like being 1-powered evasive attackers against an Ensnaring Bridge could have been relevant. As it ends up, it was not. And obviously the flying blockers were crucial in keeping us in the game against Spirits in Game 3. That said, they didn't actually win us anything. They were non-factors in the games we did win. And Embercleave got sided out a lot. When we didn't side it out, besides connecting with it once, it was usually just rotting in hand. Shadow Spear didn't really do much. If we had been a little bit more efficient in other aspects of our game, though, it could have. I think Shadow Spear was close to, for example, flipping the table in the final game that we just saw. So I come away from this feeling like, okay, like I'm glad we got to test some of the tech, but my feelings and my fears during discussion and during brewing did more or less come to fruition here. Now, again, maybe I missed something about some of the matches we lost in terms of what I could have done differently with lines or sideboarding or anything like that. That is always the caveat. I'm never making a final declaration. This is how it is, period. But I did write on Patreon last month a very kind of comprehensive overview of a lot of different mid-range archetypes, and I did say that I feel that almost more strongly than ever right now, mid-range decks need to be really focused and have a really clear identity. In the case of Rakdos, it's like Depletion plus Blood Moon with a decent clock. And in the case of Rock, it's like maximum mana efficiency every turn with a wide variety of disruption and a high card quality. And the list goes on. In the case of Mardu, again, I think, like I said in the deck tech in the beginning, my preferred way to start iterating with this deck, if it was just like brewing from scratch, would be Mardu Moon, where you are a Rakdos deck, splashing white for Stoneforge Mystic and with sideboard cards, and you've got all of the strengths of the Rakdos deck with a little bit of a more complicated and painful and inconsistent mana base, but you are making up for that with Stoneforge Mystic. And the Rankle package, I think, also has some potential in a shell like this, but I think it is a little bit of a trap to see the presence of Rankle incentivize the presence of Lingering Souls and Embercleave, and vice versa, to see all of those things as incentivizing each other. There are lots of synergies there. It is cute, it is fun, it is powerful when it all lines up and when you're in the right matchup. But if we're looking at Lingering Souls, if we're looking at Rankle, and we're looking at Embercleave in a vacuum, we have reduced our card quality to what, in my opinion, is an unacceptable level for an optimized mid-range deck in the current really tough metagame against a lot of really powerful decks that go over the top of midrange. We played against two of them here, and we also were lucky to fade the piles, while also having that same lack of focus. Does that make sense? So, you know, I came away feeling that some of our matchups, a lot of the decisions were relatively deterministic. I don't know how true that was. I hope that play-by-play was entertaining here. I almost wanted to go through this league just like hitting the play button for most of it and offering more broad analysis like I am here at the end, because that's what I felt. But looking back, you know, maybe the decisions were more interesting and more impactful than they felt at the time. So that is my take on our list as a whole and on the Mardu archetype more broadly. I do think there is something here. There almost by definition has to be something here, because Rakdos is so strong and Stoneforge Mystic is so good, right? So it's not necessarily completely free to put her in. It might be stronger to play Rakdos, but if you've watched this and you want to play Mardu, my genuine strong feeling is that the best way to do it is with a Mardu Moon deck, splashing white for SFM. Auriok Champion still could be a part of that, even though she's 2 white pips, if your mana base could otherwise support that, because you're probably bringing your moons out if you want to bring her in any given matchup. Some of the other white stuff, it almost feels like some of the effects are too good not to play, but they might also be a bit of a trap. I'm less convinced about the sideboarding here and about the very optimal way to present it, and to construct it. But we do have to say that if we were on Moon, we wouldn't play Cleansing Wildfire or Path to Exile, and that opens up a whole new can of worms. So it's probably not even worth going too deep into it here. Suffice to say, it would be very different. So that is my thought. Unfortunately, we do only get a 2-3, and hey, you know, this wasn't like the deck operating at full capacity. I did give my critiques of the overall, what's going on here overall, but let's also acknowledge some bad matchups on the whole. I think some deeper mulligans than the opponents took, some really like weird moments where we're like drawing a lot of equipment and opening hands, or like just drawing all of our Spyros back to back. The one thing that we can say is we didn't really get flooded. That was definitely something the deck managed to keep at bay. We got a little bit mana screwed, but honestly, that wasn't the worst thing. Like, with other reasons were why we lost games, I think, overall, rather than getting mana screwed, or certainly than flooded. We didn't learn, I think, that much else. Spyro still OP, even though we drew them in clusters here. Discard was crucial. Kaya had a really nice cameo against blue-white. I think this card is good. I think this card's really good. I would like to play more Planeswalkers than I currently am here. If we are persisting with Mardu, that would be another thing to look into. But with the 3 colors and the moons, it's all getting a little bit interesting. So another way, I guess, if you want to like bluff Moon, you could just play Planeswalkers in those slots. You could play like some Lilianas or something, and maybe move a little bit away from the Embercleave Rankle package. I'm not certain exactly. Also, just getting a higher card quality in the form of Kroxa never really hurt anybody. So those are some thoughts, some other ways to take the deck. I hope you guys did enjoy this one. I don't plan to do replays much anymore for a full league unless the donor requests them. But in this case, again, I was tilting to an unacceptable degree. I don't want to put that out on the channel. So that's what we got instead. Connor, my friend, I wish the Rankle Embercleave combo showed up a little bit more for us and shown a little bit more for us. We did see it close out the game in round 1, though. I hope that was fun for you, my friend. I hope you enjoyed this one as a whole. Thank you so much for your generous support. And thank you as well to our new Patreon supporters, the ones I shouted out in the beginning. I'm going to try to load the notifications up here again. Bear with me for a moment. And there it is. We've got new Inquisitor Corey Wooten. We've got new Tireless tier member Matt Swanson, and we've got James Clugston, who is upgraded from the Confidant tier to the Tireless tier. Really appreciate each and every Patreon supporter, especially that trio plus Connor. So there you go, my friends. If anyone out there is tinkering with Mardu, as always, feel free to share your list in the comments below. You know my thoughts by now on the archetype. I wouldn't really be looking to pick this up quite so soon after this. Frankly, I'm kind of just ready for Kaldheim spoilers to come out, and I'm ready, as always, for a ban or two from the usual suspects. That would be definitely really nice. I think that would liberate the format to a large degree, but if I were to pick it up, I would be paring down the White Splash, paring down the go wide stuff, and focusing on a higher card quality and the ability to cheese wins with Blood Moon. I think, sadly, that's a little bit where we are when you're playing a mid-range deck, especially one that's a little bit off meta. So there you go, my friends. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you for the next video and for Kaldheim spoilers as I cover them on the channel. Whether one will come before the other in terms of spoilers versus gameplay, I don't know right now. We will have to see, but I hope to see you for whatever is next. Hope everybody out there has a wonderful day, and I will talk to you soon.